She spent her last $10 on one warm meal for her blind mother. For herself, only water. Pride swallowed, hunger negotiated, winter closed in, debt followed. Every knock sounded like a sentence. Every minute felt borrowed. Then a retired Navy SEAL noticed and chose not to look away. One decision, one stand. Everything shifted. When darkness pressed hardest, God hid a miracle in plain sight. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories of faith, courage, and the miracles God hides in the darkest places. Winter pressed down on Minneapolis, burying streets in snow and silence. A tired diner glowed weakly against the cold, offering warmth to those with nowhere else to go, and judgment to those who stayed too long. Emily Parker paused before pushing the door open, not because of the cold, but because of the count she had already done twice in her head. $10. She could feel the number like a bruise beneath her ribs. $10 meant choices, and choices meant guilt. Her mother stood beside her, fingers curled lightly around Emily's sleeve. Blindness had taken her sight years ago, but not her awareness. She could sense the weather through the ache in her joints, the tension in her daughter's breathing, the way Emily's hand hovered before every decision. The world had narrowed for her to sound and touch, to trust and fear. Tonight, she trusted Emily. Tonight, Emily feared everything. Inside, the diner smelled of grease and old coffee. Heat rushed out to meet them, a brief kindness that made Emily's eyes sting. She guided her mother to a booth along the wall, the place she always chose. Out of the way, unobtrusive, easier to disappear in. Her mother slid in carefully, palms finding the edge of the table, mapping the space she could not see. Emily sat opposite, back straight, shoulders tight, as if posture alone could keep the night from swallowing them. She took out her wallet. $10. The bills looked thinner under the fluorescent lights, as if the light itself were taking something away. She folded them back quickly, ashamed of how much she needed them to be more. The waitress came by with menus. Emily thanked her too quickly, the words tumbling out with practiced politeness. She scanned prices she already knew she couldn't afford. Soup, toast, water. She calculated again, subtracting tax, subtracting the possibility of mercy. Her mother listened quietly, hands folded, head tilted toward Emily's voice. "Order something warm," her mother said softly. "For you too." Emily smiled and nodded, the lie already formed. "I will." She ordered soup and bread for her mother, water for herself. The words tasted like metal as she said them. Hunger had stopped being loud days ago. Now it was a steady pressure, something she could negotiate with if she stayed calm. She told herself this was temporary. She told herself many things. At a nearby table, Michael Carter watched without staring. He had learned the difference long ago. 45 years old, retired from a life that never really let you retire. He sat with his coffee cooling in front of him. The dog at his feet shifted once, then settled, alert but still. Michael didn't need to look to know the dog was watching the door, measuring the room, listening to what people didn't say. Michael felt the pull before he understood it. He recognized the posture, the way Emily held herself like someone bracing for impact. He recognized the economy of her movements, the way fear teaches you to conserve everything. He recognized the quiet desperation that came from loving someone who depended on you completely. He had known that once, in a different way, in different places. Emily's mother lifted her face slightly, listening. "It's busy tonight," she said. Emily nodded again, eyes on the table. Busy meant noise. Noise meant distraction. Distraction meant safety sometimes. But safety was fragile. Safety could be taken away with a word, a look, a demand. The soup arrived. Steam curled up like a promise. Emily slid the bowl toward her mother, guided her hand to the spoon. Her mother smiled, grateful, trusting. Emily looked away so her mother wouldn't hear the crack in her breathing. As her mother ate, Emily's thoughts drifted, unwillingly, back to the last few months. Losing her job hadn't been dramatic, No shouting, no explanation worth remembering, just a meeting, a polite apology, and the sudden absence of routine. The real damage came later, in the quiet. Bills didn't care about apologies, medication didn't wait for employment, her mother's condition didn't pause for grief or pride. She had borrowed money once, telling herself it was temporary. Once became twice. Then the calls started. Calm voices at first, then sharper ones. Men who spoke as if kindness were a favor she had already used up. Men who knew where she lived. Emily glanced at the door. Habit, fear, calculation. The dog lifted his head at the same moment. Michael followed the movement with his eyes, not to the door, but to Emily. The dog's instincts had found the tension before Michael's thoughts did. Loyalty wasn't loud. It was constant. Emily checked her watch. Too much time had passed? She felt it before it happened, the shift in the room, the sense of being noticed for the wrong reason. The owner approached with the stiffness of someone who had decided something unpleasant was necessary. "You've been here a while," he said, voice flat. "If you're not ordering more, there's a $5 sitting fee." The words landed like a slap. $5, half of everything she had. Emily opened her mouth and closed it again. She could feel her mother stiffen, could hear the change in her breathing. Her mother didn't see the man's face, but she heard the edge in his voice. Emily began. Her throat tightened. She thought of the cold outside. She thought of the soup, of the $10, of the debt waiting patiently to crush her. She thought of how tired she was of choosing which pain to accept. Her mother reached across the table, fingers searching until they found Emily's hand. "Emily," she said quietly, a question wrapped in a name. The shame broke then, clean and sharp. Emily felt tears spill despite her effort to stop them. "I just lost my job," she said, the truth tumbling out because holding it back hurt more. "My mother's treatment, it's expensive. I had to borrow money. I just needed a little time." The owner shifted, uncomfortable but unmoved. Rules were easier than compassion. Michael stood. The movement was simple, unhurried, but it changed the air. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He positioned himself so the owner had to look at him instead of down at Emily. The dog sat up, eyes steady, presence unmistakable. Not a threat, an assurance. "They're not causing trouble," Michael said. "They'll finish and leave." The owner hesitated. People hesitated around Michael more often than they could explain. The dog's quiet focus didn't help. $5, the owner insisted, weaker now. Michael reached into his pocket, placed a bill on the counter. "Covered." Emily stared, heat flooding her face. Relief fought with humiliation, gratitude tangled with pride. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to breathe. Michael turned to her then, finally meeting her eyes. There was no judgment there, just recognition. "Take your time," he said, and moved back to his table as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Emily's hands shook. Her mother squeezed them gently, understanding more than Emily wished she did. The soup cooled. The night pressed closer to the windows. Somewhere inside her chest, something shifted, not hope, not yet, but the faintest easing of the grip that had held her for weeks. Michael sat down, the dog settling at his feet again. He didn't know what would come next. He only knew that walking away had never been an option he could live with. And outside, winter waited. Snow thickened outside the diner as night deepened, turning streets into narrow corridors of white where sound carried too far and safety felt conditional, temporary, and always one step away from being taken back. Emily Parker could feel the warmth slipping from her bones the moment they stood to leave, as if the diner had loaned it to her and now expected it returned with interest. Michael Carter's intervention still rang in her ears, not as relief, but as a disquieting echo. Gratitude came tangled with shame, and shame came with questions she had no good answers for. Her mother's hand found Emily's elbow by instinct, trusting a path Emily herself no longer trusted. Blindness had sharpened her mother's hearing, her sense of imbalance, her ability to detect fear in the smallest changes of breath. She said nothing, but Emily knew she felt the tremor running through her daughter's arm. Outside, the cold waited without patience. Emily paused on the threshold, counting again without looking. The numbers etched into her mind. $10 had become 5, and 5 felt smaller than 0. Michael stood a few steps back, not crowding them, not pressing for thanks. The dog at his side watched the door, not because it expected danger, but because it had learned that exits mattered. Emily stepped into the snow and immediately wished she had not. The wind found the weak places in her coat and pushed its way in, a reminder that the night did not care what had just happened inside. Her mother stumbled once, and Emily caught her, heart pounding, guilt rising again. She had promised herself she would keep her mother safe. Promises were easier before money ran out. As they started down the sidewalk, Emily's thoughts unraveled, pulled backward by memories she had tried to keep quiet. The hospital corridors, the antiseptic smell, the doctor's voice carefully neutral as he explained what could be treated and what could only be managed. The way her mother had squeezed Emily's hand then, blind eyes steady, saying they would figure it out together. They had figured it out until the bills arrived, until insurance letters grew thinner and more apologetic, until the first loan officer smiled too easily and assured her it was temporary. Temporary had a way of becoming permanent when you were desperate. Emily had told herself she was borrowing time, not money, but time had a cost, and now men she had never met knew her name, her number, the sound of her fear. She glanced back at the diner, at Michael still inside, his presence a quiet weight she did not know how to carry. Part of her wanted to run, to refuse the help retroactively, to pretend she had never been seen. Another part of her, smaller but stubborn, wanted to stand still and breathe, to accept that someone had noticed and not turned away. Her mother broke the silence then, voice low and careful. "He helped us," she said, not a question. Emily nodded, unable to trust her voice. "You're shaking," her mother added, fingers tightening. Emily forced herself to slow her steps, to match her breathing to the rhythm she had learned during sleepless nights. She had learned to survive by control, by minimizing, by making herself smaller. Tonight had cracked that strategy open. Michael stepped outside a moment later, not following, simply sharing the same cold. He did not offer to walk them home. He did not ask where home was. That restraint unsettled Emily more than insistence would have. He spoke once, quietly, as if speaking to both of them and neither. "If anyone bothers you," he said, "call." He handed her a card without ceremony, no logo, no promises. A number and a name she already knew. Emily took it, the paper surprisingly heavy. The dog shifted, attention flicking down the street, a brief tightening that Emily felt rather than saw. She wondered what the dog sensed, what past had taught it to watch shadows and listen for patterns. Michael nodded once and turned back toward the diner, as if the moment had concluded. Emily stood there longer than she should have, snow collecting on her shoulders, the card warming in her palm. She thought of the $5 she no longer had, of the debt that would not forget her, because she wished it would, of the fragile space she and her mother occupied between being invisible and being targeted. As they walked away, the city felt closer, its sounds sharper, its corners less forgiving. Emily did not know yet that the night had marked her, not with salvation, but with attention. She only knew that help had a cost she did not understand, and that somewhere behind her, a door had closed that could not be reopened the same way again. The storm eased but did not leave, lingering as a pale hush over Minneapolis, where sidewalks squeaked under boots and every lit window looked temporary, borrowed against a night that remembered faces and followed them home. Emily Parker slept in fragments, the kind that ended before rest began. Each time her eyes closed, numbers surfaced, not as figures, but as sensations. The weight of owing, the sound of a phone vibrating, the pause before a voice decided how hard it would be. Morning arrived without ceremony. She made tea she could not afford to waste and set it where her mother could find it by memory. Blindness had rearranged her mother's world into a careful map of habits and textures. The cup's warmth steadied her hands. The quiet steadied Emily's breathing. It did not steady her thoughts. Michael Carter's card lay on the counter where she had placed it deliberately, as if choosing visibility could keep it from choosing her. She had not planned to call. Planning had become a luxury. Yet when the phone rang an hour later, her body reacted before her mind did, a spike of fear that made her mother tilt her head, listening. Emily silenced the call without answering, recognizing the cadence of the ring, the way it stopped just short of polite. Her mother reached out, fingers brushing Emily's wrist. "It's them," she said, not accusing, only stating. Emily nodded and felt the shame rise again, a familiar heat. She had wanted to be the wall between her mother and the world. Instead, she had become a doorway. The calls continued, spaced just enough to suggest patience. Emily tried to remember the words Michael had used, not as a promise, but as an option. Call. The decision tore at her. Accepting help meant naming the thing that hunted her. It meant turning fear into information, and information had consequences. She thought of her mother navigating rooms by sound and touch, of how easily noise could become danger. She thought of the men's voices, smooth and instructive, explaining penalties as if explaining weather. She picked up the card and dialed. Michael answered without preamble. Emily did not apologize. She did not explain everything at once. She spoke the way hunger had taught her to speak, plainly, efficiently, conserving energy. "They keep calling," she said. "They know where we live." There was a pause on the line, not hesitation, but attention. Michael asked one question, and it was not about money. "Who?" he said. Emily closed her eyes. Names were anchors. Names pulled you toward places you did not want to go. She said what she knew and admitted what she didn't, how the loan had been pitched as a bridge, how the bridge had turned into a toll road, how the numbers had grown without explanation. Michael did not interrupt. When he spoke again, it was to tell her what would happen next in terms that did not pretend to be gentle. He would check. He would ask questions of people who knew how these things worked. He would not make it worse by making it loud. Emily thanked him and hated herself for how much the word mattered. The afternoon passed with the slow violence of waiting. Her mother asked once if they would have to move again. Emily said she did not know, and the honesty tasted cleaner than reassurance. Near dusk, Michael arrived without announcement. He did not step inside immediately. He stood in the hallway long enough for Emily to decide she would let him in. Consent mattered. The dog waited by the door, attention fixed not on Emily, but on the building itself, as if measuring escape routes and listening for echoes of threat. Michael spoke quietly, outlining what he had learned without embellishment. The loan terms were predatory. The escalation was intentional. The calls were designed to compress time until fear made decisions. Emily felt a strange relief as the pattern emerged, as if naming the mechanism reduced its size. Michael offered a temporary solution that was not rescue and not retreat. A place to stay for a few nights, neutral ground, heat and a lock, and fewer reasons for strangers to knock. Emily resisted reflexively. Pride surfaced, then exhaustion drowned it. Her mother reached for her hand and squeezed, a wordless vote. Emily agreed and hated the ease with which fear overruled principle. They moved with efficiency born of practice. Emily packed what mattered. Her mother listened, orienting herself to a new space by sound before stepping into it. The dog watched the hallway as if it remembered other corridors, other nights when attention had meant survival. When they left, Emily felt the city watching in return, windows reflecting her movement back at her. The temporary place was clean and anonymous. Michael explained boundaries and left them intact. He did not promise safety. He promised to keep asking the right questions. As night settled, Emily sat on the edge of the bed, phone face down, waiting for it to ring and not ring. She understood then that saying the names had changed the balance. Attention cuts both ways. Somewhere, someone would notice they were being noticed. The thought should have comforted her. Instead, it sharpened everything, like air before a storm. Daylight revealed Minneapolis as a grid of offices and waiting rooms where winter followed indoors, clinging to coats and conversations, and where help came slowly, measured in forms, appointments, and the quiet endurance of those who could not afford mistakes. Emily Parker learned that fear changes shape when it is forced into daylight. At night, it was a presence, heavy and immediate. By day, it became procedural, asking for names, dates, signatures, proof. She sat beside her mother in borrowed chairs, listening to printers hum and doors open and close, each sound a reminder that time was passing whether they were ready or not. Her mother held her hands folded, memorizing the space by echo and air, asking occasional questions that Emily answered with careful simplicity. Blindness made patience visible. It also made waiting harder. Emily felt responsible for every minute her mother spent in rooms that smelled like disinfectant and paper, for every explanation that reduced their life to boxes that could be checked or left blank. Michael Carter moved through these places without ownership, a presence that neither rushed nor lingered. He introduced them to people who spoke in neutral tones, whose kindness arrived as information rather than comfort. Emily felt exposed as her story was told again, pared down to facts that could survive scrutiny. Losing her job was no longer a private failure, but a timeline. The loan was no longer a desperate choice, but a structure with terms designed to bend her. Hearing it this way did not erase the shame. It reorganized it, made it easier to carry without collapsing. She watched Michael listen, his attention narrowing the way it had when he asked questions on the phone. He did not promise outcomes. He promised process. That distinction mattered more than she wanted to admit. The dog waited outside offices, settling when told, rising when footsteps approached, its focus creating a small perimeter of calm that Emily found herself leaning into. It did not know the language of forms, but it knew vigilance, and that steadied her. Between appointments, Emily replayed the calls in her head, the cadence of threat, softened by professionalism. She understood now how fear was manufactured, how it pressed urgency into decisions until consent blurred. Knowledge brought relief and a new anxiety. What if the people applying pressure noticed the shift, noticed that she was no longer alone? Michael acknowledged the risk without dramatizing it. He explained how light worked, how attention cut both ways, how some tactics dissolved when documented. He also explained limits, how paper moved slower than fists, how winter gave cover to impatience. Emily felt the old instinct to run rise again, the desire to shrink her footprint until no one could follow it. Her mother sensed the change, squeezed Emily's hand, and said quietly that staying still could be a kind of movement, too. The sentence landed with the weight of truth, earned the hard way. By afternoon, letters were drafted, complaints logged, a schedule formed that turned chaos into steps. Emily was surprised by how tired she felt, not from walking, but from choosing to be seen. When they returned to the temporary place, the quiet pressed in, unfamiliar and tense. Emily checked locks she had already checked, then checked them again, the ritual calming and useless at once. She made soup and watched her mother navigate the small kitchen, confident in its limits. That confidence hurt and healed her in equal measure. She thought about the bridge she had crossed by calling Michael, how it had not delivered her to safety, but to a narrower ledge with railings. Narrow was better than falling. As evening came, the phone did not ring. The absence was louder than sound. Emily imagined men noticing unanswered calls, recalculating. She imagined retaliation as a possibility rather than a certainty, and that uncertainty gnawed at her. Michael stopped by briefly, stood at the threshold long enough to confirm arrangements and leave space intact. He reminded her of what to do if the quiet broke, not as instructions, but as options. Consent again. After he left, the dog's attention lingered on the stairwell, a subtle tension that eased only when the building settled into its night noises. Emily sat on the edge of the bed, holding the card Michael had given her as if it were a map. She did not expect sleep to come easily, and it did not. But when it came, it was deeper than the nights before, the kind that followed effort rather than escape. She woke once, heart racing, convinced she heard footsteps that were not there. Her mother's breathing grounded her, steady and unafraid. Blindness had taught her mother to trust sound, to weigh it, to know when danger announced itself. Emily lay there, listening with her, learning again how to tell the difference. Somewhere beyond the thin walls, winter continued its patient work. Emily understood that the light she had let in was not a shield, only a tool. Tools required hands willing to use them. She closed her eyes, knowing that the next test would not come as a form or a phone call, but as a knock that would demand a different kind of answer. Night returned with a harder cold, the kind that pressed sound flat and turned stairwells into throats, where footsteps carried intent, and every locked door asked whether it would be enough this time. Emily Parker understood the knock before it finished forming, a pressure in the air that made her chest tighten and her mother go still. She did not answer. She did not breathe. The sound came again, heavier now, accompanied by voices pitched low enough to sound reasonable, close enough to sound inevitable. Emily moved on instinct, the kind fear teaches quickly. She locked what was not yet locked, dragged weight against thresholds, the scrape of furniture loud in her ears. Her mother reached for her, blind hands searching, asking what Emily did not answer. Words would have slowed her down. Emily's thoughts narrowed to tasks, each one a decision made without debate. She found nails she had never intended to use, drove them where wood would take them, felt the vibration through her arms as if the house itself were bracing. She poured oil down the stairwell with a shaking precision, the smell sharp and unmistakable, a promise of hesitation she needed to buy time. She guided her mother upward, step by careful step, narrating nothing, trusting the muscle memory they had built together. In the bathroom at the end of the hall, she sat her mother down, locked the door, and pressed her own forehead briefly to the cool tile before standing again. There was no weapon within reach that felt honest. She took the lamp from the nightstand, its weight inadequate and final, and held it because holding something felt better than holding nothing. Her phone was slick in her palm as she called the number she had not wanted to need. Michael answered on the first ring. Emily did not explain. She did not apologize. She said the address and said they were here. The voices downstairs changed, patience replaced by irritation, irritation sharpening into force. The front door gave way with a sound that carried through the building like a signal. Someone laughed, too close, too casual. Then a body slipped, the laugh cut short by a thud and a curse, the oil doing what it was meant to do. Emily stood at the top of the stairs, lamp raised, heart loud enough to drown thought. She thought of her mother alone behind the locked door, listening to the world by sound alone, counting footsteps, measuring danger without sight. She thought of the debt, of how numbers could turn into hands. She did not retreat. She waited. The next moments collapsed into movement. Michael arrived without announcement, presence felt before it was seen, the kind of arrival that altered decisions mid-step. The dog's attention snapped to the stairwell, not in aggression, but in certainty, the memory of other nights lending gravity to its stillness. What followed was quick and decisive without spectacle, bodies redirected, leverage applied where leverage mattered, voices losing confidence as options disappeared. Emily registered it in fragments, the way the house seemed to exhale, the way sound reorganized itself when threat retreated. Sirens approached, distant at first, then undeniable. When it was over, Emily's hands hurt from gripping the lamp. She set it down and realized she was shaking. Michael spoke once, low and clear, telling her it was done for tonight. She unlocked the bathroom door and found her mother standing, unafraid, listening for the truth in the quiet. Emily held her and felt the release come all at once, sharp and uncontrollable. Downstairs, the mess remained as evidence, not of heroics, but of survival. As officers took over, Emily understood that safety had arrived wearing consequences. The night had not ended their problems. It had only drawn a line that someone else would now have to cross. Morning arrived pale and exacting, laying bare the apartment's scars under Minneapolis light, while the city resumed its routines, indifferent to the private battles that had concluded in the night. Emily Parker watched the steam from her coffee thin and vanish, a small physics lesson in impermanence that felt uncomfortably personal. The apartment smelled faintly of oil and splintered wood, evidence of decisions made quickly and without permission, and the quiet that followed carried a different weight than fear, heavier, because it invited reflection. Her mother sat at the table with her hands wrapped around a warm mug, listening to the building wake up, to footsteps that belonged to neighbors instead of threats, to the distant sound of traffic finding its lanes again. Blindness had trained her to measure truth by texture and sound, and this morning sounded true. Emily felt the aftershock in her body, the delayed tremor that arrives when urgency leaves and leaves you holding what it displaced. She replayed the night not as images, but as choices. Lock or not, wait or move, call or endure. Each choice had cost something, and now she was left to account for them. The police had come and gone, professional and contained, collecting statements that reduced terror to sequence. They spoke of charges and procedures, of what would happen next, without asking Emily to imagine it. That restraint felt like mercy. Michael Carter had stayed only as long as necessary, standing where the hallway met the living room, neither inside nor out, as if honoring a boundary he had helped protect. He told Emily what she needed to know in clear terms and left the rest to daylight. The dog had remained attentive until the building settled, until the echoes of the night lost their edge, then eased in a way Emily felt, rather than saw, a signal that the perimeter had shrunk back to normal life. Now Michael was gone, and Emily was surprised by how little absence hurt compared to how much presence had steadied her. She moved through the apartment, straightening what could be straightened, setting aside what could not be fixed yet. Cleaning felt like an argument with chaos she was willing to continue. Her mother asked once whether the men would return. Emily answered with the truth she could afford, not today. It was enough. They talked about ordinary things, about the taste of the coffee, about the weather shifting toward something less cruel, about a radio program her mother liked because the host spoke slowly and did not rush silences. Ordinary felt radical. Emily's phone vibrated mid-morning with a number she did not recognize. Her body tightened, then released, as the voice identified itself as a caseworker, someone assigned to coordinate the pieces that had been set in motion. Emily listened, asked questions she would not have known to ask a week ago, wrote down times and names. Knowledge had not erased fear, but it had given fear an address. She ended the call and felt a cautious competence settle in, the kind that grows when survival begins to include planning again. She thought of the diner, of the $5 that had tipped the night from manageable to humiliating, and felt a flicker of anger, unaccompanied by shame. Anger without shame was new. In the afternoon, she walked her mother through the apartment, narrating the layout aloud, naming obstacles and safe edges, turning a place of rupture into a map. Her mother followed with the calm of someone who had learned to trust process over promise. When a knock came at the door, Emily paused, listened, counted breaths. It was a neighbor, brief and apologetic, asking if everything was all right. Emily said yes and meant it in a way that surprised her. Evening arrived quietly. She cooked something simple and ate without bargaining, noticing hunger as a signal rather than a threat. As darkness gathered, she turned on lamps, not out of fear, but preference. She thought about Michael Carter then, not as a rescuer, but as a witness who had intervened at the right angle, leaving her ownership intact. She understood now that help had not erased her agency, it had amplified it. The debt still existed on paper, but it no longer owned the night. Her mother reached across the table and touched Emily's hand, a familiar gesture that carried a different meaning now. "You did well," she said, not praise but recognition. Emily felt the words settle where panic had lived. Later, as they prepared for sleep, Emily checked the locks once and stopped herself from checking again. Trust was not a switch. It was a practice. She lay awake briefly, listening to the building breathe, to the dog's memory lingering as a sense of order rather than a presence, to the city resuming its long argument with winter. She thought about what had ended and what had not, about how resolution rarely arrived as relief alone, but as a narrower path forward with fewer cliffs. When sleep came, it was unbroken. In the morning she would begin the work of finishing what the night had forced her to start, with names and dates and appointments, with patience learned the hard way. For now she closed her eyes, knowing that the line had been drawn and held, and that what remained was not fear or gratitude but something sturdier, a quiet competence earned under pressure, enough to carry them into whatever came next, without needing another chapter to explain it. Sometimes the miracle is not thunder or light from the sky, sometimes it is quieter. It arrives as the right person standing up when you are about to be pushed down. It arrives as strength you did not know you still had. It arrives as protection, timing, and a door that holds when it should not. God does not always remove the storm. Sometimes God sends what you need to survive it, courage, help, or a stranger who refuses to walk away. In everyday life, miracles often wear ordinary faces, and faith shows itself not in perfection, but in endurance. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you to look around. Someone near you may be praying silently for help, and one small action from you could be the answer. Please share this story with someone who needs hope. Comment below and tell us what this story meant to you or where you're watching from. And subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can reach those who are struggling. May God bless you, protect your home, strengthen your heart, and guide your steps. May He bring light into your darkest nights and peace into your everyday life.